So, Kingdom Hearts is good, right? And Pokemon is good. So what would happen if we fuse the two together? Today I'm going to be building Pokemon teams for each member of Organization 13. Each member has such a distinct personality and characteristics, so I thought it'd be fun to imagine how they'd express themselves through their Pokemon partners. Before we dive in, a couple notes. Each member's team will be made of 5 regular Pokemon and 1 legendary. I'll try to work in a good number of matching Pokemon types to each member's element of choice, but some members don't have a 1-to-1 type. And finally, I'll be sticking to the original 13 members, not including Xion. Honestly, I can't think of anything to base our team off of that isn't super depressing, but if you have any ideas, let me know in the comments. We'll be going in descending order, so that brings us to... In general, I'll try to assign a good number of Pokemon whose type matches the member's element, but with characters like Roxas, it's hard to decide on one corresponding type. I guess you could say his element is light, in which case I think Fairy would be the closest type equivalent. But you could also make the case for Steel matching the Keyblade, so Roxas will be a bit of a mix-up compared to most of the other teams. Let's get this jingle jangle jabroni out of the way first, because obviously... In a similar vein, I feel like Doublade makes too much sense to match Roxas' dual-wielding claim to fame. This one also makes too much sense if you take a few seconds to think about it. Roxas is to Sora as Mimikyu is to Pikachu. They're both the castaways living in the shadow of the Golden Child who eventually form an identity, and an entire fan base, of their own. I like to imagine this is the first Pokemon Roxas would partner with. Maybe he found it in the forest outside the old mansion where it's all spooky and dark. After looking at the Samurai Nobodies, I realized Duat was the perfect fit for Roxas. They definitely both have the same tood. And yes, we're going with Duat and not Samurott, because nobody likes Samurott, except for all the Samurott fans I just offended. I see you. Okay, I know what you're thinking. What does a firefighting starter have to do with Roxas? They have nothing in common. Well, what if I told you that this Infernape was gifted to Roxas as a Chimchar? By none other than Axel, as a sign of goodwill to his teammate / future best friend. Because he had faith that Roxas would take good care of this little fire monkey. Yeah, I bet you feel silly, huh? On to Roxas' legendary / maybe halvesy kind of Sora legendary in this case, type Knoll. I wasn't sure which legendary makes sense for Roxas because again, there's not much of a type to go off of. I was considering Xerneas because it's a fairy type and also Zexion, but then I saw type Knoll and it clicked. I imagined a scene of Xemnas assigning this Pokemon to Roxas as a means to test him. Then I realized how much a penchant Roxas has for bringing out the potential in faceless science experiments who go on to unshackle their chains and defy their creators. There is a deeper reason behind this pick as well, but we'll get to that at the end. Larkscene is pretty straightforward comparatively. One thing to keep in mind with the first half of her team is that Larkscene has a really playful, cutesy personality. That's why we're kicking her team off with Plusle and Minun. Not only do they fit with her cutesy attitude, but I thought they also make a good nod to her ability to split off into lightning clones of herself. It doesn't take too long for Larkscene to drop her cute facade and turn deadly though. That's why I think Morpeko would make a perfect addition to her team. She can be friendly and play along when she wants to, but it only takes a second for her to snap. I didn't want her whole team to be adorable Pika clones though. That's why I'm tossing in Luxray to even things out with its intimidation factor. I feel like this Pokemon will be the perfect backup for when Larkscene decides to get serious. Plus, their names are pretty similar to each other. When I think of Larkscene, I think of raw power and straight up danger. That's why we're rounding off her base team with Vikavolt. You can tell this Pokemon will mess you up just by looking at it. I can definitely see this as Larkscene's ace Pokemon. There were a few good electric legendaries to choose from, but Thundurus ended up making the most sense for reasons we'll get into at the end. Marluxia is just as straightforward as Larkscene. He's going monograss with one exception. Get it? Cause Scythe. Roserade is a beautiful gal for a beautiful boy. She also has a bit of a swagger to her that matches Marluxia's energy. Marluxia's title is the Graceful Assassin. Well, when it comes to grass types, it doesn't get much more graceful than Serperior. Lurantis kind of has a scythe motif going on as well, but also its colors match Marluxia more than any other grass type. Cacturne definitely gives off major Marluxia vibes. Or maybe I'm thinking of that one trainer who would dress as Cacturne. In any case, its spikes fit in with Marluxia's thorn attacks. Marluxia's legendary Pokemon was pretty easy to pick out since there aren't a whole lot of legendary grass types. Fortunately, Virizion matches Marluxia's personality really well. Luxord's a little tricky since the only Pokemon with any sort of time affiliation are legendaries. So instead I leaned into Pokemon that have some sort of tie with games or playing, which led me directly to Bisharp. It's directly inspired by chess, so this was the most clear-cut Pokemon for Luxord. Hypno's not quite as direct, but when I look at its pendulum, I think of a performer on stage. It also relates to how Luxord likes to manipulate his foes. By that same token, I think Mr. Mime fits in well. Luxord is all about indirect attacks and using the environment to trip up his foes, so Mr. Mime's invisible barriers would complement his moveset. I can see Luxord using Mr. Mime to set up an invisible maze for his opponents to find their way through. After taking a closer look at how Luxord fights, I landed on Wobbuffet. A lot of Luxord's moves are counterattacks after you mess up. Wobbuffet's wait-and-see approach is very similar. Wobbuffet also acts as a kind of riddle to solve in the middle of the fight. Luxord's last regular Pokemon was hard to pin down. I took a look at Pokemon affiliated with Luck and picked Axel since it has the ability Super Luck. I also think its ability to predict disaster fits in with the theme of fate and telling the future, which Luxord has been known to dabble in from time to time. Thankfully, his legendary was really easy to pick out. Dialga is the Pokemon of time, so it makes perfect sense for Luxord. Next we have the man, the legend, the heartthrob himself, Demix. Demix has one of the largest personalities of the whole organization, so this was one of the most fun teams to come up with. Primarina is too perfect for Demix. She's a singing water Pokemon. She'll be the lead vocalist of Demix's Pokeband. Primarina brings the voice, but Ludicolo brings the moves. This Pokemon just wants to party, so he and Demix will get along perfectly. But Ludicolo isn't the only mom with fancy footwork. Oricorio knows how to tear up the dance floor as well. Demix controls the Dancer Nobody, and Oricorio literally has the Dancer ability. My hands are tied here. You need some instrumentals for the group though, so that's why I'm drafting Toxtricity. It even manages to fit in with Demix's weapon. I'm specifically going with the low-key form because Demix isn't about that amped life. I think Wishy-Washy captures Demix's personality the best actually. It starts off as a total coward and seems like a complete pushover, but when you back it into a corner, it'll square up real quick and recruit its clones. Out of all the water legendaries, I think Keldeo comes closest to being on Demix's wavelength. Pun intended, of course. They can definitely bond over being the underdog in a group of bona fide badasses. Even though Axel's another member with a clear-cut type, he was tricky to come up with a whole team for. Maybe it's because there aren't that many fire types, or because he has such a particular personality. Here's where I landed though. I knew I wanted a fire starter for Axel. I was considering Incineroar because I think he matches Axel's cocky personality, but I ended up choosing Emboar after reading that it cares deeply about its friends in its Pokedex entry. That's also how I chose Pyroar. One of its Pokedex entry reads, when attacked by a strong foe, it will protect its friends with no regard for its own safety. Yeah, that pretty much sums up Axel. I wanted a Pokemon that matches Axel's intensity. We know and love him as being a big softie, but he can turn up when the job calls for it. That's why I think he would keep a Houndoom in his back pocket for when he needs to roll up his sleeves and, to quote, take care of an icky job. It may not be a fire type, but one of its Pokedex entries reads that it will absolutely not forgive failure or betrayal by its goons. This fits in perfectly with Axel's orders to eliminate any traitors to the organization. Espeon is described as being very loyal to its trainer in its Pokedex entries. It also pairs with another Pokemon belonging to someone Axel has a strong connection with. Solgaleo may not be a fire type, for some reason, but it is representative of the sun and it can learn some fire moves. But most importantly, just like Espeon, it makes more sense when you consider it as a counterpart to another Pokemon. Spoiler alert, it was Psyx. Psyx is the other half of Axel's dynamic duo. He's one of those moon people, and fortunately there are plenty of moon Pokemon to go around. I mean, this is just a gimme. Besides being a literal moon, its Pokedex entries describe how its power is affected by the phases of the moon. One of the entries also mentions how its eyes transfix foes with fear, which definitely matches Psyx's vibe. This is the counterpart to Axel's Espeon. It's the Moonlight Pokemon, so of course Psyx would train one. Similar to Lunatone, its Pokedex entries describe how its power grows stronger under moonlight. This Pokemon has a strong association to the moon and the night. It is a werewolf after all. Its fighting style matches Psyx's. It goes all out without any regard for its safety. The Pokédex also mentions how it only listens to orders from trainers who can draw out their true power. I think this description matches Psyx's loyalty to Xemnas as well. I wanted to add more Pokemon whose raw strength and intimidation matches Psyx. I think Pangoro fits that description. As soon as you see this hulking lad, you'll fall in line. Rounding out Psyx's regular Pokemon is Drampa, a Pokemon with the Berserk ability. Much like Psyx, it's usually calm and collected, but it can snap real fast. That's when you run and take cover, before it burns your house down. Surprise, surprise, Psyx's legendary is the Moon Pokemon. But now you understand why I gave Axel Solgaleo, see? They're a pair, eh? Zexion is a trepid little trickster who trips you up, so most of his team will be filled with deceitful Pokemon. Zoroark is the most obvious Pokemon since it disguises itself as other people, much like how Zexion does. The two of them must get into all sorts of shenanigans together. Meanwhile, Chatot's providing background vocals to help Zexion mimic the voice of whoever he's disguised as. Kecleon is also all about changing its appearance to conceal itself. Malamar can't change its appearance, but instead it works its foes from the inside out. It uses hypnotism to deceive others into doing what it wants, which fits in smoothly with Zexion's tricky arsenal. Liepard may not have psychokinetic or disguising powers, but almost all of its Pokédex entries mention how stealthy it is. This would be a more direct attacker that acts on Zexion's behalf. While a Pokemon like Malamar or Zoroark distract an opponent from the front, Liepard sneaks in from behind for a stealth kill. There aren't any legendaries known for disguising themselves or other Pokemon, so I thought a ghost type would make the most sense for Zexion. I settled on Spectrier. Its Pokédex mentions how it doesn't use its sight, which I think is fitting since Zexion deceives others based on what they see. Also, the two of them definitely get their hair done at the same salon. Lexius is a simple man. He sees rocks, he smashes. That's why his team is filled with nothing but big, burly, rock-crushing, whole-ass units. Vexin is an icy lad who's something of a scientist himself. His team will mostly be ice types who match his personality or curious conniving. Vexin's weird. Mr. Rime is weird. Mr. Rime also happens to be an ice type. Now kiss. Since Vexin's weapon is a shield, I thought it was appropriate to call on this big chonker as a physical wall for him. Since Vexin presents as more effeminate than the other members, even compared to the only woman in the group, I thought it would make sense to give him a Frostlass. I feel like this Pokemon's personality captures Vexin's really well. Much like Frostlass, I feel like Weavile's devious personality suits Vexin. Most ice types are either too cute or too aggressive looking, so Weavile strikes a nice balance for someone like Vexin who isn't directly confrontational but more of a schemer. For the only non-ice type, I chose Ditto. There are rumors that Ditto is actually the result of a failed attempt to clone Mew. Who else do we know who experiments with replicas? Oh yeah, that's exactly what Vexin does. Ditto would make the perfect specimen to study and use in battle, much like how he creates a copy of Sora in his data fight. I think Glastrier is the most fitting of ice legendaries for Vexin. Its Pokédex entry mentions how its ice mask is 100 times harder than Diamond, which harkens back to how Vexin hides behind his shield. So there really aren't any Pokemon associated with the wind, so basing Zoltan's team on the element he wields is out the window. Instead, I took a look at the Dragoon nobody and focused on the Dragon types for him to partner with. Altaria is probably the Dragon type with the strongest connection to wind since it's just a big puffy cloud floating in the sky. One of its dex entries specifically mentions how it catches updrafts to soar through the sky. Haxorus is just a dragon, but its sharp tusks kind of remind me of Zoltan's lances. He's also huge and intimidating, which is the vibe Zoltan would probably go for. Noivern is a dragon that uses sound waves to attack, which is kind of like the wind. Okay, finally a Pokemon that's actually relevant to wind. Drifblim soars in the sky on drafts, so we'll take it. And by that same token, Jumpluff also makes sense. Pretty much every one of its Pokédex entries mention how it floats on the wind. I can imagine Zoltan creating different wind tunnels to float Jumpluff around the field quickly to spread its cotton spores. Naturally, Zoltan's legendary Pokemon would be Tornadus. Thanks for making my job easy. Zigbar's team will mostly be based on his role as a sharpshooter, since his control over space is kind of an ambiguous concept. I'll throw in a couple nods to that power though. First off, we have the sniper Pokemon, Inteleon. This would be Zigbar's long-range shooter, similar to how he goes in his first-person mode. Similar to Inteleon, this is one of the few Pokemon with Sniper as an ability whose design actually reflects that. Its Pokédex entries say that it likes to lurk in the gaps between rocks and the seafloor, which is kind of how Zigbar uses gaps in space to fight. I was resistant to adding 2 starters to one team, but Decidueye is just too perfect to pass up. I think the Ghost type comes closest to matching Zigbar's ability to move throughout space. But also, Decidueye's whole design is about sharpshooting. He even uses arrows like Zigbar. They practically have the same desperation move. Dragapult is also a Ghost type focused on projectile attacks. I think it's fitting for Zigbar to have the privilege of using a pseudo-legendary since he's the organization's number 2. I definitely wanted a Pokemon that mimics Zigbar's ability to move through space. That's where Gengar comes in since it can hide its body in shadows. Not only does it match Zigbar's ability, but I feel like Gengar is the only Pokemon who can truly match Zigbar's trickster status. For the legendary, we have to go with the Pokemon who specifically has the power over space. I also think it's appropriate for Zigbar and Luxor's legendaries to be a pair, since both of them have secret identities that are really significant. Finally, it's time to unveil Xemnas' evil plan all along. As we all know, Xemnas is a vindictive little Twinkie. He also doesn't play by the rules. You may have noticed certain patterns emerge between the rest of the members' legendaries. Xemnas specifically distributed the legendaries so that he can control them with his own team. That's right, Xemnas plays exclusively in Uber's tier. First up, we have Landorus, the leader of the Kami trio. Next is Cobalion, leader of the Swords of Justice. While it isn't necessarily the leader of the Light trio, Necrozma does exert its influence over Solgaleo and Lunala by stealing their light. Similarly, Calyrex isn't explicitly the leader of Glastrier or Spectrier, but it can tame them and use them to power itself up. And finally, Arceus leads the Creation trio. Of course, Xemnas would hog the god of Pokemon who can change into every type for himself. This leaves one spot for a non-legendary, and I think Metagross deserves that spot. Aside from having a giant X on its face, Metagross is a powerful pseudo-legendary with the intelligence of a supercomputer. It's the perfect companion for the scheming Xemnas as a superior in-between. So that just leaves one legendary unaccounted for, Type Null and Roxas. That's because Xemnas underestimated Roxas. He didn't think they would pose a threat to him, which plays into his ultimate undoing. Roxas uses Type Null, who eventually evolves into Silvally, to break free from the organization and try to mount a counterattack against Xemnas. Unfortunately, his plan fails, but he dealt a serious wound to the organization nonetheless. So there you have it, 78 Pokemon spread across Organization 13. What do you think of my picks? Are there any glaring omissions? Sound off in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for even more Kingdom Hearts videos coming very soon.